Copper in the ancient and medieval world. Before 1200, copper's story begins thousands of years before the medieval period. People first used copper as early as around 10,000 BC, carving it into tools, decoration, and simple implements because it can be worked with minimal technology. By about 5000 BC, humans had begun alloying copper with tin to make bronze, kickstarting the Bronze Age and a huge leap in technological ability. In the centuries leading up to 1200 AD, copper was everywhere in daily life: tools, knives, household utensils, jewelry, armor pieces, religious objects, and small decorative items. It wasn't widely used as major coinage in much of Europe. In 1200, governments preferred silver and gold for money. But in some places, small copper or bronze tokens served as low-denomination currency. In other regions like parts of the Middle East and Asia, copper and copper alloys were more common in everyday exchange. There were also pieces of copper used as standard barter units. Approximate value of copper in 1200. We don't have exact market prices per kg for copper in 1200 because medieval pricing wasn't standardized in the way modern commodity markets are. But historians agree, copper was much less valuable than silver or gold, often valued at a small fraction relative to silver, sometimes as low as 1/100th of silver's worth in some ancient systems. Copper coins and tokens existed, but 1 full kg of raw copper would likely represent the earnings of several weeks or more of a craftsman's work, and could buy important necessities: grain, cloth, simple tools, but not luxury goods. Comparing that to the year 1200, think a blacksmith might trade a large copper ingot for a cow or a year's worth of grain. Or in cities, copper coins could afford daily food for a family for days. The exact prices vary by region and scarcity. But the key is it was an everyday but not elite metal, useful and respected for utility but not a wealth store like silver. 1700s. The early modern copper boom. By the 1700s, the demand for copper had expanded dramatically because European naval powers, especially the British Royal Navy, began covering ship hulls with copper to protect against marine organisms and improve speed. This drove up demand and prices. Copper was widely cast into cannons, hardware, cookware, bells, and architectural details. We do have some rough historical price indications from the late 18th century. In Britain around 1785, copper sold for somewhere near £78 per ton. This is a historical account, not a precise kilogram price. By 1807, it climbed to £200 per ton due to naval demand and wars. Adjusted for modern currency value, this was a very high price compared to typical produce prices of the time. In 1700s terms, the same amount of copper might buy a horse several months' grain. Goods for outfitting an artisan's workshop. 1800s. Industrial Revolution. The 19th century brought deep changes. Electricity's invention and telegraph wires turned copper into a critical industrial metal. Mines expanded massively in Chile, Spain, and the U.S., increasing supplies and lowering costs in relative terms. Throughout the 1800s, a kg of copper was still significantly valuable because it was essential for machinery parts and electrical innovation, but industrial expansion meant prices were more stable. Copper was a key part of machines that grew national economies. So, its value became tied not just to currency, but to industrial output. 1900s. Electricity and telecommunications age. In the 20th century, copper's importance surged due to the electrification of cities and factories, telephone, and later computing, wiring, transportation infrastructure. Copper became less about coins and more about infrastructure and technology. Its price fluctuated with supply and demand rather than intrinsic scarcity. A kg of copper before WWI might buy a nice jacket or a year's worth of school books, but after electrification, it became indispensable for communications and power grids. 2000s. The modern age. By the turn of the 21st century, copper's applications had multiplied: computer and electronics, wiring, renewable energy, wind turbines, solar panels, electric vehicles, data centers. Copper prices in the early 2000s varied but generally ranged from a few $1,000s per ton. For example, Around 2000, the average global copper price hovered under $2,000 per ton, meaning around $2 per kilogram, a far cry from record prices in later years influenced by markets and global demand. A kg of copper in 2000 could roughly buy a basic mobile phone, a week or two of groceries in many countries. Present day 2026, record highs in 2025 to 2026. Copper prices have hit record levels on global markets. Average prices are around $11,000, $12.00 per metric ton, or roughly $11, $12 per kg. In some local markets like India, prices have reached around $1,300 per kilogram due to global supply-demand dynamics. So, in 2026, 1 kilogram of copper could buy a few high-end electrical components, small appliances, or even a decent meal in some cities, or represent a significant fraction of a day's wage for many workers. Copper's value today reflects not its rarity, but how critical it is for global technology, decarbonization, digital infrastructure, and industrial growth. Comparing 1200 to 2026, value and purchasing power. It is impossible to give exact prices for the year 1200 because markets weren't standardized and economies were local. But we do know the scale. In 1200, copper's worth was rooted in its utility and barter value. A kilogram of raw metal could represent several days or weeks of labor and buy basic necessities. In 2026, 1 kilogram of copper at $11 to $12 per kilogram is substantial money, but so are incomes and what money can buy. Modern salaries, global markets, and industrial needs mean the price is higher in absolute terms, but everyday needs and economic systems are also far larger. Broad comparison year approx. Copper value: what 1 kilogram could buy. 1,200 equivalent of weeks of a worker's wage. Grain, tools, livestock, daily needs 1700s, much less than precious metals but in demand. Horse months of supplies 1800s, industrial value rising. Machinery, parts, wires 1900s, electricity, air, consumer electronics, infrastructure components 2000s $1 to per kilograms, roughly. Phones, staples 2026 $11, $12 kg, high-tech goods. Significant wage value. Why copper's value changed so much. Copper's historical journey shows how utility multiplies value, from everyday tools and weapons to maritime technology in the 1700s to electricity and communication in the 1800s, 1900s to electronics and infrastructure in the 2000s to critical, renewable, and digital tech in the 2020s. Copper has stayed valuable not because it's rare, there's a lot of it, but because we've found more uses for it over time. And society's ability to pay for those uses has grown with industrialization and globalization.